Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to Ask Me Anything, a program of UGA's Development and Alumni Relations Office. My name is Dean Kelly Smith, and I have the pleasure of serving as Dean of the College of Pharmacy at the University of Georgia. Like so many of you, I'm a proud alumna of UGA. I graduated in 1992 with a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy, and in 1993 with a Doctor of Pharmacy degree. Following my residency training in Jacksonville, Florida, I worked in several healthcare and academic capacities at the University of Kentucky and UK Healthcare before returning home to UGA a little more than 2 years ago. Our program is one that's very close to my heart. Founded in 1903, we were the very first pharmacy school in the state of Georgia and remain as its top-ranked program and most robust research enterprise. Our largest degree program, the Doctor of Pharmacy program, is 24th out of more than 140 U.S. colleges of pharmacy as ranked by U.S. News and World Report. We offer this degree program here in Athens, but also our students spend time at campuses in Albany, Augusta, and Savannah, along with sites all across the state. Now, along with our PharmD program, we also offer several undergraduate and graduate degrees in biomedical and pharmaceutical sciences. In fact, a Bachelor's of Science in Pharmaceutical Sciences is now considered the #1 most valuable undergraduate degree in median income by both Bankrate and CNBC. Other graduate level degrees we offer at the college are in a variety of fields, including pharmaceutical health services, outcomes and policy, and clinical and experimental therapeutics. Now, close to today's topic, we also offer advanced online degrees in regulatory sciences and graduate certificates and master's degree options in international biomedical regulatory sciences. These programs happen to be anchored at our Gwinnett campus, which today's speaker, Dr. Grace Gowda, leads. Now, finally, along with Dr. Gowda, we are blessed with nearly 90 faculty members who conduct research at all points along the medication continuum, from learning how disease-causing organisms affect the body, all the way to evaluating how prescription drug marketing structures, pricing, and legislation impact the health of our patients. And as you can imagine, several of our faculty are quite busy these days conducting COVID-19 research. I encourage you to visit our website, rx.uga.edu, and navigate to our COVID-19 resource page to find out more. Well, as you can tell, I'm a bit proud of our college and was pleased to share those facts with you. And it's certainly changed over the decades since my graduation, and it's yet another reason why I'm privileged to be back here at UGA. And now to introduce my colleague and today's speaker. Dr. Grace Gowda is the Program Director of Graduate Studies for the International Biomedical Regulatory Sciences Program in the College of Pharmacy. Prior to joining us at UGA, Dr. Gowda worked at Mariel, now part of Boehringer Ingelheim, for many years, where she held various leadership positions within the regulatory affairs field. Her areas of expertise and research include product, drug, and vaccine development, regulatory policy regarding the drug and vaccine approval and delivery processes, and research in the field of neuroscience and mental health. Dr. Gowda received her PhD in pharmacology and toxicology from the University of Texas at Austin, a master's in pharmacy from Nagpur University, and bachelor's in pharmacy degree from the University of Madras, India. She has more than 25 years of pharmaceutical industry experience and has registered several products with the Food and Drug Administration. Clearly, she is well qualified and an expert, as she shares with us now her insight on COVID-19 vaccine development and delivery. So buckle up, get ready for a lot of great information, and begin thinking about the questions you'd like to pose. Dr. Gowda, it's all yours, so please take it away.
Thank you, Dean Smith, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. If there is any problem, just let us know, and we can see if we can increase the volume. So today, first I want to thank the university for giving me this opportunity to present the insights in COVID-19 vaccine development and delivery to you all. Since we have people from many backgrounds on this call, we thought we would start with some basics on what is COVID-19 and vaccines, and then we will delve into all the different vaccine programs that are being evaluated today in clinical trials, and then we'll close it out by proposing what might be a path forward for access to those vaccines and delivery. And then we'll open it up for questions. If you have any questions along the way, please put your questions in the chat. And if needed, the moderators would stop and ask those questions if appropriate. Otherwise, we will answer all the questions at the end of the slide presentation. This slide has a lot of information that you could use in the future for your reference if you want to go back and have a question. So there are a lot of links in the slides that you could use. And this whole presentation is recorded and will be available on YouTube. So let's get started. So we'll start with some definitions. Most of you might have an idea of what is a vaccine, but I thought it's important to put it right in front. What is the definition for vaccine? Vaccine is like a drug substance that, when given, administered into the body, stimulates your immune system to produce antibodies and defense mechanisms that will recognize any kind of pathogen or microbe that your body might encounter in the future, thereby preventing infection. So it's more of a preventive product rather than a therapeutic product. So that's a key point to keep in mind. And at the very bottom, you have a reference to New York Times. This is a very good tracker, vaccine tracker. You may want to make a note of it. It keeps track of all the different vaccines in different stages of development for COVID-19. And a lot of the pictures and information in today's presentation was taken from there because they have simplified the scientific terms into lay terms, which is what I wanted to use today. So a vaccine is something that is very important to prevent future infections. So what is COVID-19? Both, there are many definitions out there, but the easiest one is it's the coronavirus disease that was identified in 2019. Very simple. And most of you know the symptoms of COVID-19. I don't have to tell you, but you have listed most of them here, and you could see the symptoms from 2 to 14 days after exposure to the virus. You could have fever, chills, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, loss of taste, smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. As you can see, it can produce so many different symptoms in so many different people. Not everybody has the same symptoms. So that is COVID-19, and we all have been dealing with it since February of this year. So that is COVID-19, and you also have heard the term emergency use authorization. So this term is used widely because we see, drugs going into emergency use authorization, taken off emergency use authorizations. So I thought you all should know what that means. What it is a legal mechanism that allows Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, during a public health emergency to make available medical products that can be used to protect the public. So what is an emergency? It could be caused by a chemical agent, biological agent in our case for COVID-19, but it also could be radiological or nuclear agents. So any kind of emergency, FDA has been given the authority to make products available for emergency use. So what type of products can FDA allow? It can allow the use of unapproved medical products. It could be a drug, it could be a vaccine or a diagnostic device, or you could take an approved medical product and use it for a new unapproved use. so that it can diagnose, treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening disease or condition. And many of you might have heard the hydroxychloroquine, which was a malaria medication, was already approved for use for treating malaria, was given emergency use authorization as an unapproved use in COVID-19, but then the emergency use authorization was withdrawn because the studies showed that it was not as effective as originally thought. And if you need to know more information on COVID-19 and the emergency use authorization, you can see the link at the bottom of the slide, and it gives you current up-to-date information that you can follow. So FDA has been very busy. They have given so many emergency use authorizations, and most of them are in the area of diagnostics. As you all will recall from the news, everybody wants testing. So they have so far given emergency use authorization for 247 diagnostics. And most of the diagnostics use molecular tests, about 197 of them. A molecular test, what that means is the PCR test that looks for the virus DNA. And there are about 46 tests that have been approved for antibodies caused by the virus and 4 tests for antigen or the protein that the virus has. FDA has also given emergency use authorization for devices. As you all know, the protective equipment and ventilators have been in great demand, so they have given emergency use authorization for the protective equipment and related devices. 2 drugs have received emergency use authorization. One is remdesivir. It is used for patients who are severely ill. It basically reduces the number of days in the hospital. And then another product called Fresenius Propofan 2% solution from Fresenius Kabi to help patients be sedated when they require mechanical ventilation. Just a couple of weeks ago, FDA gave emergency use authorization for the convalescent plasma or the hyperimmune globulin that can be made from the convalescent plasma. I also gave you some link down where you can monitor the new type of products that are given emergency use authorizations by FDA in the link in the bottom of the slide. So as of today, you all have heard that people are doing many studies on COVID-19. And there is a database called clinicaltrials.gov. And it is a database where all clinical trials have to be registered in the US. So looking at it last week, as of last week, we had 3,252 studies that involved some aspects of the COVID-19 disease. And many of them are in different phases. We will talk a little bit later about what the different phases mean. But there, as you can see, many scientists are studying this disease. And 84 of these studies are funded either by NIH or the US government. Of these 3,000 studies, about 1,000 plus studies are looking at drug intervention. What does that mean? These are products like blood thinners, steroids. Those are the studies that are looking at that. And similar to the clinicaltrials.gov in FDA, there is also another database. That is the World Health Organization database that actually registers studies around the globe. And so far, that database has about 2,377 studies related to COVID-19 as of last week. So you can go to these websites and look at all the different types of studies that they are looking at. To give you a perspective, COVID studies are being done around the world, and you can see in red, the US and Europe have the highest number of studies, clinical studies that are being done. But Studies are being done in Canada, Latin America, Africa, China, India, Australia, Russia. So everybody around the world is doing all kinds of studies to understand this disease. As you know, it has made such a big impact on all our lives in 2020. So we're going to look at what vaccines are. What are the different types of vaccines? I'm going to go through the definition of the different vaccines, and then we are going to look at COVID vaccines. So this is just a precursor before we go into COVID vaccines, but I'll also tell you if any of the types of COVID vaccines are approved using these different types of vaccines. The most common, or the vaccines that have been around for ages, is the inactivated or attenuated vaccines. Just by the terminology, inactivated means the virus is inactivated by chemicals. Attenuated means it has been weakened by taking certain parts of the virus pathogenicity out. So these type of vaccines have been around for a very long time. I've given you some examples of attenuated vaccines like chickenpox vaccine or rotavirus vaccine that children get when they are very young, and also some inactivated vaccines for polio and hepatitis A. One COVID-19 vaccine, inactivated vaccine, has been approved in China for limited use, and we will look at it. The definition for approval in different countries mean different things, okay? So we have to be careful. In US, when it means approved, it can be widely marketed, but here the terminology is very important. It's approved for limited use in China. So we will talk more about it a little later. Then the other common type of vaccine is protein-based vaccines, or if in a scientific term, it is antigen-based vaccines. So these are just vaccines created from the coronavirus proteins, but there is no genetic material in the product. So here are some examples of vaccines that are protein-based. Influenza vaccines have different antigens from the different flu strains. The toxicoids are, there are secretions from the tetanus and diphtheria pathogens. And the recombinant vaccine is produced where you take parts of the protein producing gene and integrate it with another pathogenic gene, such as in the case of shingles, the varicella is a chickenpox type virus, and you try to make it strong so that it can produce a high level of immunogenicity. So these are protein-based vaccines. Basically, the vaccine contains proteins of the virus. And so far, no COVID-19 vaccine that is protein-based has been approved, but many are on clinical trials, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes. Now we are going into the higher technology vaccines. The viral vector vaccines, these are vaccines where you have viruses that are engineered to carry the certain parts of the coronavirus gene. So viruses by nature can enter cells and they can replicate and cause infection. But sometimes they don't have to be pathogenic. They can still produce the protein to cause the immunogenicity without causing the disease. And in Russia, they have approved a vaccine for early use. You might have heard in the news, the Sputnik vaccine. And China also has a vaccine using a viral vector technology for special use by military. And we will talk a little bit more detail as we go through the different type of coronavirus vaccines. And the last type of vaccines are called genetic vaccines. These vaccines can deliver one or more pieces of the coronavirus own genes into cells to provoke an immune response. And usually genetic vaccines are of two types. They can be DNA vaccines. What that means is the DNA is incorporated into a plasmid. You can see the picture of it. And it is it is injected into the body, then it goes into the cells and it multiplies, it gives you the, it transcribes into mRNA, and then it produces the protein. So what the protein does is it stimulates the body to create antibodies or have cell-mediated immunity. The other type of genetic vaccines is called RNA vaccines, where you directly give the mRNA. And this is a very interesting technology because many of the US funded vaccines under clinical trials under the program of Operation Warp Speed are mRNA vaccines. Keep in mind, none of them is approved, but this is a new technology. And the nice thing about these mRNA vaccines is as you send them into the body, there are certain phagocytosis process that will take in the lipid nanoparticle that contains the RNA, and they will stimulate the body to produce the protein. So the key is that protein or the antigen is what stimulates the immune system to produce antibodies and cell-mediated immunity. So again, this is a very novel technology. And to help you all to further talk about this particular technology, mRNA vaccine, you all might have heard of the Moderna vaccine. It has been in the news starting in March, April, and you can see from this slide, I took it from the Moderna website. They call it the Moderna Vaccine Dream Machine. So basically, they started, the speed is given in the top right corner, where they got the genome on Jan 13th. By February 23rd, they had a product. So the technology is very promising. They took piece of the mRNA that they were interested. They did the sequencing and made it into a DNA design where DNA can replicate easily. And then once the DNA gets replicated, then you see in the bottom part, that DNA in presence of certain enzymes and buffers and nucleotides can create mRNA. Then this mRNA can be incorporated into a lipid nanoparticle, which is basically fat. So it gives you the structure, and then it can be injected into the body. The reason you want to do the mRNA with lipid particles is as soon as you inject into the body thinks of it as foreign. So it will engulf it and it will try to digest that foreign particle. When it digests the foreign particle, the mRNA will be released. And mRNAs, when they're released in the cell, they can produce proteins through the machinery that is in the cell. That's whole purpose is to make proteins from mRNA. And once you get those proteins are nothing but antigens. They get secreted, and then the body responds to those antigens by creating antibodies or develop cell-mediated immunity. So we learned about what are the different types of vaccines and the vaccines that we are focusing on to get us through this COVID disease. But before you can start clinical trials, you need to have some kind of toxicity or safety studies done. And this slide basically gives you a very, very high level of some key things that has to be done. First, you have to make sure that whatever vaccine you have created can create immunogenicity. You will hear in the news, oh, this vaccine, they tried it in the lab and it produced antibodies. That is very important. That shows that it produces an immune response. And people can do it using in vitro or animal studies. Then it's also required to make sure that vaccine does not cause harm. So the toxicity studies are important. And I have listed here a few of them. And one of the important ones, since this coronavirus by itself causes respiratory distress, we want to make sure the vaccine doesn't exacerbate it. So they have to do studies where they look for any kind of enhanced respiratory disease. FDA early on, I want to say it was either March or April, FDA came out with their guidance document on how to develop COVID-19 vaccine. So if you want to have more information, I have given you the link at the bottom. So you can go to that website to learn about what type of things you need to do before you can bring the vaccine to the market. And FDA has been very good. They also gave some additional flexibility to the vaccine producers, where they said, traditionally we would do these vaccination challenge studies in animals before we give it to the human patients. In some cases, they have said you could do it in parallel to the clinical phase 1 trials. So overall, FDA has been very flexible. But as a regulatory affairs professional, I will tell you that if you have a project or if you're thinking of a vaccine or product, the best thing is to go talk to FDA. FDA will provide you guidance, and they will tell you what requirements are needed for you to get into clinic. This is unlike many other countries. FDA has a lot of advice that they would give you. In some countries, you have to pay fees to get scientific advice. So this is something that you can use if you are in the area of trying to develop vaccine or drugs or products. So this is a very important step. So you have a vaccine idea, you have tested it, and it looks like the toxicity is acceptable and it's safe. Then you want to go into human trials. So one of the things in the same guidance that I mentioned to you that FDA put out, part of COVID-19 vaccine guidance, is to let the people know who are dying to develop the vaccines, if you have used a platform before to deliver a vaccine, you can use that as a surrogate to start your clinical trials. And basically what that means is, say, for example, you have a platform through which you have been making recombinant flu vaccines, for example. You can use that platform to start your coronavirus clinical trials because FDA is familiar with the platform that has been used. And FDA has also been willing to just use draft reports, and as long as they're available within 120 days of the start of the trial. So overall, FDA has given flexibility so that we can get from the lab to the patients quickly. FDA has also provided guidance on how you can do these trials. Of course, vaccines are given generally to healthy people. So the phase 1 trials, they wanted to make sure that you give to low risk healthy people, as long as, even if they are older people, as they should not have any other medical comorbidity. And for the phase 2 and phase 3 trials, since this is a brand new vaccine, you have to have a placebo-controlled randomized trials. And both of the phases, you need to use diverse population. And for the phase 2 to phase 3 trials, you need to actually follow up 1 to 2 years. Why? We need to find out how long does the immunity last. So that is why the trials are very long. And FDA also has given some flexibility in the primary efficacy endpoint for these placebo-controlled trials, that they should be at least 50% efficacious. Some of you might think, oh my God, that is a low number. It is actually a reasonable number because many of the flu vaccines that we all get year to year is only between 60 to 70% efficacious. So again, FDA has given some flexibility so that we all could get the vaccines to protect ourselves from COVID-19 mortality and morbidity. So most of these trials have something called Data and Safety Monitoring Board. This is an independent group. I'm mentioning it because many of you might think, oh my God, how does the information, they suddenly have these trials and then FDA is saying they're going to give emergency use authorizations. Have they locked the database down? Have they done the analysis? All of those things. So the Data Safety Monitoring Board is actually an independent group that is not related to the company or the government. They just look at the data. Okay, and they say, okay, if there is some kind of safety issues with the vaccine, like recently we had the AstraZeneca, they're the ones who will say stop. They are the ones who will say, hey, there is enough positive data for us to move forward with this vaccine in wider population. Again, the Data Safety Monitoring Board is a protective mechanism that we have that looks at the vaccines and the results from the vaccines. Just so that you all know, most of you might know what are the different phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. Phase 1, as we talked, it's the first in human studies where you look at the general safety and possibly the maximum tolerated dose, and also to look at serious side effects, and is generally done in healthy population. Phase 2 and phase 3 is where we are looking at the side effects, and we are also looking at a bigger population. Now we are moving to, in phase 2, it's about 100 people. In phase 3, it could be thousands of people. So again, I put the slide in here to kind of make sure everybody understands when we talk about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 is basically a progression of the clinical trials. So now is the interesting part you all have been waiting for, is what are these different vaccines that are available or being studied in the clinical trials. We'll start with phase 1. I am not going to go through every line. I put it here so you have the information. I'm just going to go through the ones that are highlighted in yellow or in red. The first vaccine, the reason I bring it up is a CureVac. It is also based on the mRNA technology that we talked about with the Moderna vaccine. It's similar to that. And the reason this one is being collaborated with the Elon Musk company Tesla is they have a strategy where they could create micro factories. Remember, we would need billions of doses of the vaccine to protect everybody around the world. So this particular technology developed by CureVac has that capability. So I just wanted to put it there. It's in phase 1. Then you have the GlaxoSmithKline and multiple partners developing an antigen. This is a recombinant vaccine. If you could recall, it's a recombinant protein vaccine. And US government has given $2.1 billion for 100 million doses. Again, it's in phase 1. Another vaccine I wanted to point out is the Merck vaccine. It's similar to the Ebola vaccine that's being studied by Merck. It uses the viral vector technology, and US government has given 38 million for developing the vaccine. And these are in phase 1 trials. And as you could see, there are many, many vaccines that are in phase 1, phase 2 trials. Sometimes you can combine the phases. And the one I'm pointing out is the Sputnik vaccine, where it says approved for early use in red. That vaccine is actually only in phase 1, phase 2. So this is where we have to be careful. Even though it is approved for early use in Russia, they actually have not completed the traditional phase 1 to phase 3 trials. So the terminology is different by country. So their terminology is approved for early use, but while they're conducting the trials. Another vaccine here.
Gowda, I'm going to interrupt, and I apologize, but we've got some anxious people who want to ask you some questions, and we know you have a lot more information you could share with us. So we'd like to transition to a little bit of Q&A. If we might. I know you may need to, though, refer back to your slides at some point to share and illustrate some further concepts, because you've packaged a lot of information for us, and we're incredibly grateful for that. So I'm going to encourage the audience to use the Q&A feature and that sort of thing to incorporate their questions. And Dr. Gowda, I'll give you one as you have shared, and we're talking just then about the Sputnik vaccine and something that's happening in Russia. You've mentioned some terms like EUA, this emergency use authorization, and then the official approval process in the US. So can you help kind of here again do a side-by-side comparison of what those mean? Are they interchangeable, or what can we see when products might come to the market or actually be able to be used?
So emergency use authorization is exactly what it means. FDA authorizes use of the product, whichever medical product it is, for that emergency. So once the emergency goes away, the emergency use authorization goes away. So you cannot readily go get the product. You have to go through the approval process to get the product. So you may have developed a device, for example, and you're using it during this emergency and the emergency is finished. Then you have to still go through the regular approval process so that you can get the full approval to market the device for long term.
Excellent. So an emergency does not last forever is what you're telling us. And hopefully
Exactly, exactly.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I see another question in our Q&A box. Someone's wondering if how vaccines can be effective if the virus actually mutates. What are the considerations there for things we may not know much about yet?
That is a very good question. We do not know very much about the virus and the rate of mutation and how much it's transforming. Yet people are doing studies on them, but we know that the spike protein is the protein that you see on the head of the virus. Let me show you a picture of the virus. So the red dots that you see on the virus is actually very pathogenic. That allows most of the companies to develop vaccines against that protein. It is considered relatively stable so far. So that is what most of the companies are targeting to that protein, that S protein, the vaccines. So they are looking at areas of the virus which is much more stable, versus there are areas of the virus that could mutate a lot more.
Excellent. Now you can imagine we have probably participants today that are not only graduates and affiliates of UGA, but some employees who are on campus perhaps working today feverishly to do great work here. Someone's wondering, is there a way, since UGA is such a large institution and we're doing research in this area, where perhaps we could get access to vaccines in an earlier fashion? How do people decide who can get the vaccines early in the process?
So the best way, if you want, is to participate in a trial. Again, the trial is all placebo controlled, so you could get the placebo or you could get the vaccine. There is a plan. I just read about it yesterday, but I couldn't find an exact source for it, like a government source for it, so I didn't include it in my presentation. The first plan is to give for healthcare workers and people with high risk, such as elderly or people with, compromised immune system. And the second second stage would be the essential workers and children. So they do have a plan, but I haven't seen an official, this is like a news thing that came across. I don't want to say that is what the long-term plan is by the government, but it appears like that there would be a staged approach where people could get the vaccine depending on how healthy or how risky you are. But today, if you want to participate in the trials, I know there are trials in Atlanta. I am not sure about Athens.
So to build on that, you mentioned you had a lot of resources in your slide sets. If I wanted to find out about those trials, any of those websites going to help me out to try to track down a trial, perhaps?
Yeah, you should go to the website that is clinicaltrials.gov. That is the website where everybody who conducts a trial have to register within 30 days. And it will tell you, if you go to that website, it will tell you where the studies are going and where the investigators are, whether there's an investigator site here in Athens. So it will tell you the details of where the studies are being conducted. So I would recommend going to clinicaltrials.gov to find out where the trials are and how you can actually participate.
Thank you. Our next question is about how long or how often you might have to get a vaccine. So do you think this might end up being something like an annual shot, like we have to get for the influenza that's circulating that season or that year? Will there be boosters that we need? Is it going to be kind of like the shingles where it's multi-phase? Any early ideas or predictions there?
So far as we understand, one dose of the vaccine doesn't seem to provide the immunity we need. So it looks like you need to have at least 2 doses. At least that's what is being shared in the public domain by the vaccine manufacturers. That's what the studies are doing. The clinical trials are where you get 2 doses 1 month apart. In terms of the duration of immunity, remember I mentioned you have follow-up of 1 to 2 years. The duration of immunity those vaccines provide is yet to be known. So I was going to say that many times, some of the vaccines you have to take them every 5 years, 10 years. So I think it'll be more of a booster that you may have to go. I don't know whether it'll be every year because flu vaccine is a little different because flu mutates so much that you have different strains that you have to speculate what strain might be circulating and develop a vaccine for that. So for this coronavirus, we still don't know how fast it mutates and whether we need to have, whether the vaccine we create protects again many strains or one strain. So there's still a lot to be learned. So we still don't know much. All we know is we need at least 2 shots for the time being to protect ourselves from the currently circulating COVID-19 virus.
Excellent. So you've mentioned a lot, and you showed us what was the beginning of a long list of these vaccine candidates or products that are potential products that are being evaluated. It's kind of sometimes been termed a race to the market. Who can get out there first? Does that mean that the very first one is the only one that will make it to the market? How does this regulatory thing work in terms of the role of the FDA and which products or how many could be on the market?
Well, as you may recall, there are at least a couple of vaccines in this deck. One is the Moderna vaccine, and the other one was the AstraZeneca vaccine. And then, of course, you have the Pfizer vaccine, which is in phase 3 as well. So the AstraZeneca vaccine, about a week or so ago, we learned that it has been put on clinical hold. So the vaccine developed some kind of adverse reaction, severe adverse reaction in one of the clinical trial participants. So it's been put on hold. So out of the 3, 1 is gone. At least for now, it's been delayed, right? Because, where they have to evaluate and make sure they can remove the clinical hold. And usually those things take time. The other 2 vaccines is the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. Both are the same technology. They are mRNA vaccines. And actually, I think the Pfizer one is actually increasing the enrollment from 30,000 volunteers to about 44,000 volunteers. And I actually saw a news bit from Pfizer that their vaccine, they may have even preliminary results by next week. To me, you need so many vaccines. And if you look at the slides, you'll see that many of them, they have only agreement for 100 million vaccines. 100 million doses. So if you think about it, we are 300 million people. And you have to take 2 doses, and they have so far agreed to only 100 million, 100 million doses from each company because that's all they could manufacture. So I think there's plenty of space for more than one vaccine as long as the vaccines meet that minimum efficacy threshold of 50% and they are safe. So as long as, FDA does not say give preference for one company versus another company, if 5 companies send the information, they will review everything and all of them have space in the marketplace to compete.
Very good. So you mentioned the clinical trials and this 50% endpoint and how they work. So for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with the clinical trial design, does this mean volunteers, they just kind of put them in a room give them a dose of the vaccine, and then expose them to COVID in the air and see what happens? How do these trials really work?
So the vaccines, these vaccines are placebo-controlled randomized trials. People live in their homes and then they go for regular checkup. So the vaccines are intended to mimic normal life. Okay, so they first go qualify for a trial where they would have screening, and once they meet the criteria, inclusion criteria for a trial, they will be enrolled in a blinded way, either into the placebo group or the control or the vaccine group, and then they would all get shots. So the patient or the volunteer would not know whether it's a placebo or a vaccine. And then they will go about their business and they will go for their checkups depending on the protocol. There could be checkups every week, every 2 weeks. And basically, I haven't read the protocols. I'm assuming they're collecting blood samples and they're monitoring for their symptoms. So they're going to look at all of this and then come to a conclusion. The efficacy is how many of those patients get sick with the COVID-19. So the hypothesis is the placebo group will obviously get more sick with the COVID-19 as they go about their regular business, they're going to get COVID-19, whereas the vaccine group, in theory, right, in the hypothesis is at least 50% of 50% of the people are protected because they took the vaccine. So it's a comparison between how many people who are getting infected versus how many people who got infections but have been protected by the vaccine. So it's a ratio between the two. So you need to have the difference between the two should be at least 50%.
Excellent. So speaking of clinical trials, we read and hear a lot that you have to have different types of patients in those trials to make sure drugs and vaccines, in this case, work in all those different types of patients. You and I are fortunate because we have faculty colleagues here at the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy who actually wrote about the concerns about the disparities in healthcare and certain patient populations with COVID-19 who perhaps aren't being studied, aren't involved in some of those trials. And notably, one of those groups would be those who report as African Americans, and other groups that maybe have other healthcare issues that seem to exacerbate the problem. So does that mean that the FDA requires a company to study drugs in every single category? Do they study drugs in just one type of patient and then theoretically everybody can get the compound? How do they handle challenges like that?
So the trials, if we looked at the COVID guidance, it says it requires to have diverse population. And what I heard is that there has been issues in enrolling patients from certain communities. And the Pfizer study, actually, I learned in the news that they've increased the enrollment specifically for that reason, to increase the, communities that have not been included so far, and also people who may have other complications or comorbidities. So the additional almost 14,000 patients are going to be focused on these additional groups. At least that's what I heard in the news. So that is good news, because usually women and minorities sometimes don't get involved in the clinical trials because it is a voluntary participation, right? And also, how do you take the trials to those communities where people could understand the informed consent process, what risks are involved, and get themselves enrolled? I think I also heard in the news there are groups that are working on it to go and enroll these patients so that the vaccines can be studied. But at the agency level, it is a requirement to have diverse population. If you want to say, is there a mandate to have X number of people from this different ethnicities or age groups? In this particular one, I do not believe that there is. But that, FDA never mandates anything. It's just you have to use a diverse population. The protocols are written in a way that, you are able to conclude the study in a reasonable time. So there is usually no mandates. It's only, hopefully the investigators, enroll a diverse population.
So when we do finally reach that day, and this seems to be our last question here, where we'll have hopefully at least one vaccine, but perhaps several to choose from, is it going to be something where someone would have to go to a health department, would have to go to a hospital? Where might they be able to obtain the vaccine? Any early ideas of that?
Yes, so this is the good news. A lot of you heard in the news that CDC sent out a note, a memo to get the local health departments, medical facilities, physician office, and pharmacies to get ready to distribute the vaccine. And it'll be distributed from a company called McKesson. They are very big and they are good distribution centers. So it will be distributed through the McKesson company to all of these state departments, your physicians' offices, to pharmacies, medical facilities. So that was that memo that went out, that everybody should be ready by November 1st to start distributing the vaccine. And the nice thing is, just like you guys all go get your flu vaccine from your local pharmacy, and they've also given provisions that COVID-19 vaccines can be administered by pharmacists for patients who are 3 years of age or older. And that came out of the PrEP Act that was recently, signed on.
Excellent. So that certainly warms this pharmacist's heart. But Dr. Gowda, you certainly have warmed all of our hearts and have been incredibly insightful. So thank you for both your wisdom and just your insight regarding vaccine development and release. Lots of tremendous questions. And as you have said, you have lots of information that our participants will have access to with this slide deck. Participants, as you can tell as well from the depth and scope of this presentation, the impact that our UGA College of Pharmacy has on science and healthcare is simply tremendous. Your support of our research and our academic endeavors certainly can impact the lives of many, including our nearly 1,000 students who are training to meet both the pharmaceutical and the healthcare needs of the state of Georgia, as well as those beyond the state well into the future. Last year, we were fortunate to benefit from the generosity of our nearly 8,000 living alumni. And part of that was granting more than $308,000 in scholarships to our students. So it would behoove me to remind you as participants that if you would be so kind or wish to consider supporting our students and their efforts to bring healthcare to communities across the state and the country, please check out our college's website. That's rx.uga.edu to learn more. On behalf of the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy and the Alumni Association, it's our pleasure to have joined each of you today for Ask Me Anything. For a listing of future programs, please visit alumni.uga.edu. Wishing you the best afternoon possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. And thank you all very much.